Episode 14, The Journey. Have you ever stepped out of your house, got in your car and driven away? Of course you have. And if so, you've set out on a journey. The journey is step 3 in the 9 steps of story structure, and it's the second most integral part of any story. The most important part, of course, is the main character, the person embarking on the journey. In many cases, that's you. It could be somebody else. The journey is the action or activity. It's the task, the job to be done, the quest, whatever it is that you set out to do or accomplish when you leave the house. Unless, of course, you're hosting a wedding reception in your backyard for 70 people, in which case that's the journey and you didn't leave home. But in any case, it's the action part of your story, the action or activity. It can be something big like running a marathon or something small like hosting a dinner for a small group of friends. It can also be a business journey like raising money for a startup or working on a huge multi-million-dollar project. Think of any movie, and there's always a journey, a movement through space and time. It's what happens along the way that makes the story compelling. The main character begins the journey with no expectation that anything bad is going to happen. Everything's going to go according to plan, right? No big deal. But then along the way, surprising stuff happens. Unexpected challenges, obstacles, and surprises. The car breaks down. Someone gets kidnapped. The bad guy shows up. Darth Vader in Star Wars, Lord Voldemort in Harry Potter, the Joker in the Batman movies, Agent Smith in The Matrix, the alien in Aliens. The journey can be any experience of going from one physical place to another, such as moving from one house, one city, one state or province to another, but it can also be a move from one job to another, one relationship to another, one state of health or well-being to another. An integral part of any physical journey is the mental, emotional, and possibly even the spiritual journey from one place to another. You can't have a physical journey without experiencing an emotional journey, a transformation of some kind, because every journey is about change. And even though some journeys seem like they're going to be small or insignificant, they can end up being more dramatic, clumsy, and hilarious than you ever imagined. Welcome to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life 20-Minute Podcast. I'm your host and story coach, Doug Stevenson. In this podcast series, I'm going to share with you practical storytelling hacks, techniques, and holistic approaches that will make your stories stick. Stories that sell you and your product or service. Now, if you feel that you learned something valuable today, please click on the follow or subscribe button. Now, in this episode, we're going to explore the concept of the journey of your story and how it can be a big thing or a small thing. The magic is in the details and what you choose to include and what you choose to exclude, to leave out. And I'm also going to tell you a journey story from over 50 years ago that's still relevant today. All right, let's get started. In past episodes, I've talked about how all of your stories are built around meaningful moments. All too often, my students and participants have struggled to identify their stories because they think the meaningful moments have to be huge and dramatic, when in reality, all you need is a journey. Something you're doing in your day-to-day life that becomes something worthy of developing into a story because an obstacle or unforeseen event happens. Here are a couple of examples of journeys. One of my students told a story about going hiking as part of an outward bound experience. The journey was simply going for a hike. Another was a story of a husband who was sent to the store to buy a set of dishes and having it turn into a ridiculous fiasco. It was a hilarious story, but the journey was just going to the store to buy a set of dishes. Another memorable one was about shoveling snow. And then there was one about giving a presentation in front of a board of directors. And a powerful story that I still remember was about composing an email. Not just any email, an angry response email. but the journey in that story was simply sending an email. Some of the journeys people brought to me deal with internal issues. One in particular that I remember from quite a few years ago had to do with a woman who kept quitting jobs and moving on because all of her bosses were demeaning to her. After about 5 demeaning bosses in a row, her best friend confronted her about this pattern and asked her if this had anything to do with her relationship with her father. Well, it turns out it did, and she eventually broke the pattern. But what was the journey in that one? It was a journey of self-realization. Some of the best stories are about a journey that leads to a new awareness or revelation. I want to share a story with you about a journey I took back in 1972 when I was 22 years old. I knew from a very early age that I wanted to be an actor. I actually won my first audition to play Christopher Columbus in 9th grade. And then after that, nothing. That was it. There wasn't any theater department or plays to act in my high school. And so it wasn't until I dropped out of college in 1969 after my freshman year and found a method acting class in Chicago that I finally got to study acting and do a couple plays. Now, my first play was The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. I got to be the Shakespearean clown, Launcelot Gobbo. It was great. And my second play was an original musical about a bunch of high school greasers. It was called Grease. Yep, that Grease. And I was the original Danny Zuko in the world premiere production in Chicago before it went to New York and became a big hit. That was pretty amazing. I got to tell you, that was really amazing, especially seeing how big Grease has become since then. Well, after a couple of years of trying to make a living as an actor in Chicago, way back in the early 70s, acting in a couple of TV commercials and doing some modeling, but mostly acting in plays for free, it was obvious that I'd have to go to LA or New York to make it big. There weren't any movies shooting in Chicago back in the 70s. Well, why did I choose LA? I chose LA because, well, beaches and bikinis and movie studios. So I made the decision to move to LA. And then reality set in. I needed money and a car to get there. So I hatched my perfect plan. I was going to save $1,000 and pay off the Volkswagen Beetle I was buying from my dad. He was being very nice, letting me have this car. Then one night after acting class, my friend Susan and I went out to a restaurant to get a bite to eat. And she asked me what was happening with my plan to go to LA. I mean, I told her about this at least a year earlier. Well, I told her I was waiting for the right moment when I had $1,000 and she broke in. She broke in. She just stopped me. She said, I know, Doug, about your perfect plan. But here you are over 2 years later making the same excuse. When are you going to go, man? And I really didn't have an answer because I didn't want to go until I had things in order. So she gave me a piece of advice. She said, Doug, I wanted to make a big change a couple of years ago, and I kept putting it off just like you. I wanted everything to be just right, to be in order, but it never was. Then one day my mom said to me, Susan, stop making excuses and just pick a date. Get out a calendar and pick a date. And that's what I did, Doug. I picked a date. And on that date, I made the change. And that's what you need to do, Doug. You need to pick a date. And on that date, you just go no matter what. So you make a commitment, you pick a date, and on that date, you go. Believe me, if you do that, things will start to change. Well, on the way home, I realized she was right. She was right. I was putting it off. I was scared. So I got out a calendar and I picked a date. September 15th. That date was about 6 months out. And for the next 6 months, I worked longer hours driving taxi, and I started saving money, a little bit here and there. And I also knew that I wasn't going to be able to pay my dad for the car. So I made a deal with him to give the car back to him when I left. And rather than living with the someday I will go mentality, I had a deadline, a date to work towards. And on September 15th, 1972, I went to my parents' house to say goodbye. I can still see myself standing there with my mom and dad in front of the house that I grew up in. And then I walked away. From everyone and everything that I'd ever known. And I made my way to a freeway entrance ramp. And with $250 in my pocket and an army surplus duffel bag filled with my clothes, I stuck out my thumb. It began my journey from Chicago to Los Angeles. I was hitchhiking to Hollywood. And man, oh man, I was scared. I didn't know anyone in LA. I had no idea what I was going to do once I got there, but I just had to go. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just have to go. I had to take my shot at stardom. Well, it took about 20 minutes to get my first ride. It was exciting and horrifying all at the same time, and it worked. I got a ride and then another ride. And as I got farther and farther away from Chicago, the fear started to melt away. Well, I spent the first night in my friend Steve's dorm room at the University of Iowa. And the next morning, I hit the road again. My next stop where I knew someone was in Denver at the University of Denver. So there I was cruising down the freeway with my first ride of the day when along comes a Volkswagen bus with a University of Denver decal on the rear window. I couldn't believe it. So I asked the guy I was riding with to pull up next to the VW bus in the passing lane and to get even with the driver's side window. So he did that. And I rolled down my window and I started yelling to get the driver's attention. Hey, hey, hello, hey, roll down your window, roll down your window. All of this is happening at 65 miles an hour. And the driver, a young hippie looking guy with long hair, rolls down his window and I yelled out, hey, are you going to the University of Denver? That's where I'm going. I'm hitchhiking. Can I get a ride with you? You know what he said? Sure. So we pulled over to the shoulder and I switched cars. And now I'm in the back of the bus with three other guys, students heading back to school. Now, I want you to get this. From Iowa City to Denver is a 12-hour drive without stops, all the way across Iowa, Nebraska, and into Colorado, the whole middle of the country. 800 miles in one ride. That's over 1,280 kilometers, which is insane for hitchhiking. And you know what? They dropped me off at the front door of my friend's dorm at the University of Denver. Door-to-door service from Iowa to Denver. Can you believe it? Was it luck or fate or simply reading the signs? I saw the decal on the back of the VW bus and I took action. And that's not the only miracle that happened along the way. The next morning, leaving Denver, I stuck my thumb out again. And man, I was feeling good, feeling free and happy and very optimistic. And on the second ride of the day, a guy in a pickup truck stopped for me. And as we rode south on I-25, going from north to south in Colorado, I could not believe what I was seeing. Now remember, I'm a city kid from inner city Chicago, and here I am cruising down the freeway in sunny and beautiful Colorado. And to my right side are the Rocky Mountains. I'd never seen such amazing mountains. And up ahead, I saw this huge mountain with snow on top. It was my first glimpse of Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs. And then we continued on south into New Mexico, up and down through rolling hills and mountains, past Santa Fe and the amazing green forest. New Mexico is just gorgeous. And as we approached Albuquerque, this guy says to me, you know, Doug, I'm going all the way to Flagstaff, but that's another 5 hours. So I need to stop overnight to see my parents. They own a motel here in Albuquerque. And you know what? I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you stayed in one of the vacant rooms. So what do you think? You want to stick with me and we'll head out to Flagstaff tomorrow morning? Another miracle. A free night in a motel and free breakfast and a ride west to Flagstaff, Arizona? From Denver all the way south to Albuquerque and west to Flagstaff, Arizona. Now remember, I was scared when I left Chicago. I mean, really scared because I had no control over what was going to happen, no plan on how it was going to work out. And here I am 4 days into this trip, and it's worked out better than I could have ever imagined. So finally, he drops me off in Flagstaff. And that fifth day, it was pretty clumsy. It was pretty hard. Short rides, odd stops in the middle of nowhere. But finally, I got a ride with a guy going all the way into Los Angeles. And as we're getting closer and closer, the sun is going down. He's going to drive into LA, but it's getting later and later. And it was after midnight as we're approaching Palm Springs. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, when I left Chicago, I was worried about where I was going to sleep at night. I didn't have enough money for motels, so I brought a sleeping bag and I hadn't had to use it yet. And for some reason, I felt like I'd been robbed of some of the drama, having to find a place to sleep under the stars. So I asked the driver to drop me off at the next rest stop. And for the first time in 5 days, at a rest stop outside of Palm Springs, California, I slept out under the stars. And as I laid there that night, looking up at the stars, feeling so grateful for this amazing journey that I was on, and all the people that had stopped to help me, and the strange way it had all worked out so effortlessly, I just finally fell asleep. And when I woke up the next morning, I knew this stage of the journey was about to end. And a new journey was about to begin. I'd be in Los Angeles later that day. And I figured that if the journey ahead, my quest to make it as an actor in Hollywood, was going to be anything like the journey I was on, it was going to be all right. It's going to be okay. Well, to cap it off, I got a ride out of Palm Springs with a guy who was heading into Los Angeles. And when I told him why I was going there to be an actor, he told me he was going to go out of his way to drop me off in Hollywood, which is not where he was going, by the way. So he drops me off on the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Vine Street. And that was it. Standing on the corner of Sunset and Vine, I was in LA. And I was actually in Hollywood. I'd made it. Now, you may be wondering what happened in Hollywood. Did I become a movie star? Well, you know the answer to that. No. I didn't make it in Hollywood. I spent 13 years in LA doing all the right things, showcases, plays, acting classes, everything I could think to do to try. And even though I got a couple of walk-on parts in movies and TV, I eventually had to walk away. I had to walk away from my hopes and dreams of becoming an actor and set my sights on a new beginning, a new chapter, which led me back to Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I met Deborah and got married, where I became a professional speaker and started teaching storytelling, which led me to be here talking to you today. But what that experience of hitchhiking to Hollywood taught me was, and the lesson has stuck with me for over 50 years, it taught me that sometimes you need to walk away. When you walk away from where you are, from what you know, in search of something better, you don't need to know how it's going to work out. The answers will come. People will appear. Solutions will present themselves. Miracles will happen. But you have to walk away. You have to step away into the unknown. Just walk away. Now, how about you? Is there something you want to accomplish? Is there something calling to you, beckoning you forward, but you're afraid to walk away, to stick your thumb out and ask for help? Do you really think you can do it all by yourself without other people who would lend a helping hand? I got to tell you something. I was amazed at how many people were more than willing to pick me up and carry me down the road a little closer to my dream. But what was really interesting to me was when I told them that I was going to Hollywood to be an actor in the movies, they loved it. They loved it. They just loved it. They thought it was really cool that I was willing to hitchhike all the way across country to pursue my dream. Maybe some of them felt a little jealous. I don't know. But I know they were glad to help. I want you to hear that. These complete strangers were glad to help me. So I want you to think about where you are in your life right now. Do a little inventory. Are you where you want to be? physically? Are you where you want to be in your job, in your career, in your relationships? And if you feel like there is something waiting for you, get out a calendar and pick a date. And on that date, walk away. So that's my hitchhiking to Hollywood story, which for me was a transformational experience. It was over 50 years ago, but it's taught me a ton of life lessons. I learned a lot about myself when I was out there in the middle of the country. Maybe that's why I've been so brave so many times, walking away from bad jobs, bad relationships. Walking away also means walking towards. And if walking seems too slow for you, run away. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get out your story journal or your list on your computer and make a list of some of your life journeys, big and small. And remember, it's not about the event, the journey. It all comes down to what you use that journey to teach. So for each journey that you write down, make note of the lesson it teaches. All right. Well, that's it for another amazing episode of Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life. Now, if you feel that you learned something valuable today, there's two things I'd like you to do. First, click on the follow or subscribe button. And second, share this podcast with 3 people. Help me spread the word about storytelling that sticks for business and life. And as always, I'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Let me know that you're out there listening and learning. And if you want help with your stories, speeches, or TED Talks, get in touch with me at doug@dougstevenson.com. That's doug@dougstevenson.com. All right, well, thanks for listening. Till the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.